The first reading talks about St. Stephen and his martyrdom. And St. Stephen and St. Barnabas are two of my favorite saints in all of the history of the church. St. Barnabas was the saint whose name means son of encouragement. And his role in the early church was to encourage the other apostles, including St. Paul, to be accepted. And St. Stephen was one of the first deacons and one of the first adult martyrs in the whole church. St. Stephen was a deacon who was preaching the truth that had come down, handed down to him from the apostles by Jesus Christ himself. And the Pharisees and some of the Sadducees were so upset that he was teaching these things that they told him to stop and insulted him and said he was a heretic. And so he went through the whole history of how Israel had been sinful and how they had been, some of them had been hypocritical. And they were so angry when he spoke the truth to them that they started picking up rocks and stoning him to death. And as if that wasn't bad enough, they didn't want to hear the truth. They put their hands over their heads like a little kid saying, la, 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 I'm not listening, I'm not listening. Screaming and just pelting him with rocks until he died. What a horrible way to die. Imagine people standing around and throwing bricks at you until you finally fall unconscious. But what did he do? He said, Father, forgive them. And he looked up to heaven and he said, I see Jesus seated at the right hand of the Father. And when he saw that vision of Jesus that they call the beatific vision, all of a sudden the stones and the rocks didn't hurt so much because he knew where he was headed. He was stoned to death for speaking the truth, not his truth, but God's truth. We live in a world that's so twisted. I'm starting to think that we're becoming the new Sodom and Gomorrah. The world is pushing an agenda on us through everything from television advertisements to political statements to all of these things that are against God's teaching. This afternoon, I'm going to talk to a group of high school students about Pope John Paul II's Theology of the Body. It's a beautiful book that he wrote talking about God's original plan for sexuality and how it was meant to be something pure and simple that was an act of love between a man and a woman that would possibly bring forth another act of love, a child. And for us to pervert that is against God's will. It doesn't mean that we can stand up and scream and rant and rave at people that are doing things or believing things that are different than us. We're called to just speak the truth lovingly and quietly, recognizing that the Word of God is the sword of the Spirit. It's as sharp as a razor blade, as sharp as a sword. It's not a baseball bat. But you think about the Amish and the Quakers who live a very simple lifestyle. They believe in the Bible. They don't believe exactly the same way we do, but I admire them because they set apart themselves as people that were called to live the life that they feel they're called by in the Bible. It's the reason our country was founded. It's why the Pilgrims came here in the first place. Because they believed in something that their government was pushing against, which the government was pushing against them, so they left their country and came to start a new land, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that above all things, we're one nation under God. When we start to forget what God taught us and start to forget to stand up for it, our civilization starts to fall apart. Look at all of the television shows and the movie shows that talk about sexuality as something as recreation, as something as fun, and as long as you care about this person, it's okay to have sex with them, even though you're not married. Well, that's not what God intended in the first place. And when we speak up against that, even if we speak so softly, the The likelihood is that we're going to get people battling it back against us, like they fought with St. Stephen. But we just have to trust that if we speak the truth, but always, always in love, and we become instruments of peace, that in the end, God's truth will prevail. But only if we believe in our hearts and profess with our lips the truth that God has taught us down through 2,000 years, through generation after generation. This is our time in the history of the church. It's our time to quietly and lovingly stand, but strongly stand up for what's true.